So yesterday we talked about the Holy Roman Empire and segued into the 30 Years' War. That's what the bell ringer was about. And of course the DBQ, which hopefully you had completed by now. That was about some of the religious matters that sparked the Reformation that led to the 30 Years' War. And of course on the AP2 chart, the second half is about the 30 Years' War itself. It actually to break it apart into periods and then put 3 points for each. So looking at the notes, as you can see up here on the screen, we are going to go over the different periods. We've already gone over the Bohemian period, so today we'll finish up by going over the Danish, Swedish, and French period. And I alluded at the end of the Bohemian period that people from outside were going to start getting involved for political reasons. The Danish period starts when King Christian IV of Denmark decides to pick up the Protestant cause. Remember, within the empire, the Protestant leader has been defeated. And so he is going to pick up the cause on behalf of Protestants. However, despite his intervention, he finds himself outmaneuvered by Maximilian of Bavaria. Maximilian of Bavaria. And Maximilian is determined to help protect Catholicism, especially now that outsiders are starting to become involved. In doing so, he decides to hire mercenary help. So he's going to have 4 hired soldiers. In particular, Albrecht of Wallenstein. So that would be spelled Albercht. That's Albercht. Of Wallenstein, which is spelled Walllenstein. So this mercenary, of course, and his forces are going to cause Maximilian to be successful, maybe more so than if they hadn't been along for the ride. And Maximilian doesn't waste any time. He wants to symbolize his early defeat of the Protestant forces by declaring an edict of restitution to make it seem like the Catholic victory is official and that they're here to stay. And part of this edict of restitution is they declare Calvinism illegal. And church property that have been taken, or maybe even from nobles by Lutherans, he is going to seize that back. So property is going to be recalled. Now, after this has happened, of course, the Danish are still going to be involved, but not to the extent that they were before. So the Protestants need a new mascot, so to speak, or symbolic leader to take over their cause. And so we enter what is the Swedish period. The Swedish period. Because of the fractured nature of the Holy Roman Empire, this Swedish force seems much more professional and bigger and impressive and intimidating. So Gustavus Adolphus is the king of Sweden. He helps lead a serious force. Also assisting with this, of course, is that he has retained the services of the Dutch, but also the French. And the reason why the French are surprising is because France is mostly Catholic. And so this is one of the countries that gets really just involved for political reasons. They're concerned about some of the German Catholic states becoming too powerful. They don't want the Catholics to create a large league and possibly a country that borders on them. They don't get along all the time necessarily with Austria. And so Gustavus Adolphus and his forces are going to march into the Holy Roman Empire in 1630. He also earned some support from Catholic princes, simply because he just wants the religious balance restored. And so the French money in particular helped. But in the end, as any part of agreement that he wanted to make, he would not submit to the Catholic leadership. And so his fighting continues to drag on through 1632, when, unfortunately for him and the Protestant effort, he was killed in battle. Since France has gotten involved, of course, Spain then gets involved on the other side. And so from 1635 to 1648, the war would pit France and Sweden, the two big players on the Protestant side, even though France is Catholic. And on the Catholic side, the two big players are Austria and Spain. And notice that none of these figures are one of the small principalities or kingdoms within the Holy Roman Empire. Austria itself is its own impressive kingdom, so is Spain, France, and Sweden. Internally in the Holy Roman Empire, people become less enthusiastic. Plus, socially and economically, the 30 Years' War has had a devastating impact on the local population, on farming, agriculture, trade, and it really made people mindful of the fact before this all started, especially with that Peace of Augsburg, everyone just got along and minded their own business when it came to their religion. And so by 1648, there's renewed cries for peace, and so the Peace of Westphalia is signed in that particular year, and that is spelled Westphalia. Even though this peace is signed, Spain and France will actually be fighting kind of a separate conflict that will occur through 1659. So not all the parties involved settled their differences just because of this treaty. Some of the parties just simply wanted their sovereignty, the fact that they could control their own system of government and so on all by themselves. And so the Swiss Confederacy and the United Provinces were both recognized in this treaty. The United Provinces are the Netherlands, basically. Not exactly identical, but for all intents and purposes, we'll just say the Netherlands. And then, of course, the Swiss Confederacy being to the south. So, Swiss Confederacy recognized, United Provinces recognized, Calvinism would also be recognized. The Catholic forces will no longer consider them to be evil. Well, maybe they do, but they're not going to take any action because of it. Religiously, they just went back to whatever the Peace of Augsburg was. Whatever the local ruler decides is the religion, then that will be the religion of the territory. Probably the biggest benefactor out of all this would be France. Sweden certainly stepped up to the plate, but by the end of the war, it was France that looked like the superior military power. In fact, it would be probably the most intimidating and recognizable army for a considerable period of time after this. The biggest losers were, of course, the German people. Their land had been destroyed and ravaged. They didn't really gain anything out of this. They didn't have a new central authority or a country or anything like that. The Austrians also were considered pretty big losers because they couldn't steer the rest of the German-speaking peoples. Austrians also speak German in any particular direction. And they, of course, ended up not being able to get a decisive victory out of all this. But one state within the Holy Roman Empire that did end up becoming more significant and learned a lot of lessons from the military actions that happened during the war would be the country that would eventually start the actual nation of Germany later on. Does anybody know what that country is? Starts with a P. Yeah? Prussia, yes. So Prussia will become one of the smaller kingdoms or states within the Holy Roman Empire that will become more significant, starting with this. Technically, back then it was called Brandenburg Prussia, but we'll just keep it Prussia for simplicity. But the one thing that was decisive, of course, is there would still be religious discrimination. There will still be, for instance, in a lot of countries, even today in Europe, that you pay church taxes or taxes go to support a certain church, like the Church of England. So that kind of stuff still happens. But for the most part, the religious conflict doesn't really occur. And we see this because Germany, when it does actually form in the mid-19th century, the North is Protestant, the South is Catholic. During World War I, they don't really care about those differences. The Nazis don't care about those differences. And so religion as a tense source of violence kind of falls through the cracks when it comes to Europe. They learned their lesson. And this carries over to the United States because all the different denominations that arrived here remained, for the most part, tolerant of each other.